So I recently made a video about estimating the total map size of Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Ionios, which has seemingly managed to spark a pretty big interest in finding the total map size of the other Xenoblade Chronicles games too, since it's something not a lot of people have tried doing before, with the big notable exception being Xenoblade Chronicles X. And I was honestly pretty intrigued about the idea of doing a follow-up video myself, so with nothing better to do, I yet again sat down to calculate more Xenoblade maps with the hope of not going totally insane. And the results I found going through 1, 2 and X might actually surprise you, or not. Since I decided to do the games in chronological order, I naturally had to start with Xenoblade Chronicles 1. More specifically, I'd be using the Definitive Edition for these calculations, but the results would be the exact same between both versions of the game anyway, so that choice didn't matter much. And luckily for me, not even a second after launching the game I already noticed a huge problem. So if you have watched my video on calculating the size of Ionios, you might remember how I used the distance showed on the quest marker as a reference point for scale. But unfortunately the same methodology wouldn't be possible for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, since the quest marker tool here doesn't show the actual distance to your objective, it only shows a dotted line to where you're supposed to go. This wasn't the best sign to get so early on in the process, and meant that I'd have to use an entirely different approach. Luckily for us, compared to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 actually has official height information for its main cast, so I could just use that information to find a more applicable anchor point to utilize. I decided to use Dunban, who has a height of 180 meters or 5'10". This is where I stumbled across another crucial problem. I didn't know where Dunban was.
That's Dunban over there!
Oh, never mind, that's Dunban over there. With Dunban recovered, I measured the boxes in column 9 with his height to create a larger known distance, which I used to calculate their speed, which turned out to be 8.55 meters per second. With this, I could easily just use the same method I used in measuring Xenoblade Chronicles 3 video, by using their speed to find the distance on the map, by just running across a flat distance while taking the time. Then just multiplying their speed with the time it took to get across that distance. Then I just used that distance to calculate the total explorable area by importing the map into GeoGebra and making it 1:1 scale with the game, then doing a pixel analysis in Photoshop to find the ratio between actual explorable area and unexplorable area so I could find how big the actual accessible size of the map is. Now I simply had to repeat the exact same process for every area and sub-area of the Bionis and Mechonis, which luckily didn't pose much of a problem other than just taking a whole lot of time. So the next game on my list was Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and luckily this time around we have a quest marker that actually shows valuable information for these calculations. Because of that, I could just use the exact same methodology I used in my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 video. But as it turns out, calculating Xenoblade Chronicles 2's Alrest wasn't as straightforward as I'd initially hoped despite it having a usable quest marker tool, because there was a giant conundrum involving whether I should actually include Alrest's huge cloud sea in my calculations. So for those of you who don't know, the cloud sea is literally just a sea of clouds that surrounds about every region of the game. And the thing is, you can actually swim through the cloud sea, which technically makes it count as an explorable area, which would give it a green light to be counted in these estimations. But contrary to Eryth Sea from Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and its many enemies and mandatory traversal, there's literally nothing useful to do here. So would it be fair to treat them the same, or should I just not count it at all? Stumped by the conundrum, I just created a poll in my community tab and asked about it, and a majority didn't think the cloud sea should count as an explorable area, so I decided to just go with that. But since there were also a fair amount of people asking for it to count, I just decided to also reveal its total size including the cloud sea to appease everyone. So with that in mind, I went back to stitching together maps and measuring every other area in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which again was a process that took way longer than I would have liked it to, but it was luckily simpler than in Xenoblade 1. So next up was the elusive Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is quite a doozy since it's generally considered to be one of the biggest open world games ever created, as it's often listed to be around 400 kilometers squared. The only problem with these estimations is that even though they seem to be consistently thrown around, the validity of them is often unknown since no methodology has been cited for this number, or at least not one I'm aware of after doing some research. So I was really interested in finding out how close my measurements would get to the 400 kilometers squared mark, compared compared to all the other Xenoblade games, X has never been released to the Switch, which would mean having to use the borderline mythical Nintendo Wii U to access it. But luckily for us, we got 2 of them. Yeah, you better watch out, Scott. Anyways, with that problem out of the way, I basically just repeated the exact same thing I did for Xenoblade Chronicles 1. In that I used the already established height for one of the main party members. In this case I used Elma at 173 meters, and used her to measure the width of the road in New Los Angeles. And from there I just found the full diameter of MLA since it's near a perfect circle, then just used that diameter to find the full area of the map. I also yet again used the Photoshop pixel analysis method to find the ratio between landmass and water, to be able to calculate the total explorable landmass out of curiosity. And with that we finally had our estimation of Xenoblade X2. And yet again we have finally arrived at the riveting conclusion of our map measuring journey. As a fun challenge, it would be pretty interesting if you tried commenting how big you think the maps are before I reveal my results, to see what the general conscience about the size of these games are. But anyhow, here are the sizes of every Xenoblade games from smallest to biggest. Also subscribe my channel, it's lovely.
I don't know, I'd say lovely.
So in 4th place, probably unsurprising to most, we have the game that started it all, Xenoblade Chronicles 1.
Huh? What?
Which clocks in at about 28.03 square kilometers, or 10.82 square miles. I decided it was fair in conjunction with the rules to just count the water here, to make a more fair comparison with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, especially since there isn't an overwhelming amount in most areas. The 3 largest regions in Xenoblade Chronicles 1 was Makna Forest, Fallen Arm, and, you guessed it, Eryth Sea due to its high percentage of water. Coming in at a respectable 3rd place we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3 at around 40.62 square kilometers, which we calculated in the previous part of this series. This number is of course this big mostly due to Eryth Sea absolutely towering the size of the other areas by a huge margin. Plus Xenoblade Chronicles 3 just being a pretty big game in general, especially for our JRPG. And following Xenoblade Chronicles 3 up on 2nd place, we have Xenoblade Chronicles X. No, I won't elaborate yet. So like I mentioned earlier in this video, Xenoblade Chronicles X is one of the only games in the series that actually has what seems to be considered a semi-official, unofficial size at 400 square kilometers. And I actually got a pretty close number with my measurements at 355.78 square kilometers. Now for those of you that watched my Pokemon map measuring video, you might recall how I mentioned that the smaller the original measurement is proportional to the map, the bigger the volatility per se of the final measurements is. So just a small error in the starting phase of the measurements could easily lead to a change of around 20 to 50 square kilometers on the final number. Therefore it can be really hard to actually know the size without more accurate ways of measuring. But I think we can safely say that Xenoblade Chronicles X hovers at around 350 to 420 square kilometers. And finally coming up at 1st place, easily being the biggest Xenoblade Chronicles world, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
Woo! Yeah, baby!
Now you might be asking yourself how the that's even possible. Well, it's true that the size of the explorable landmass itself isn't that impressive, only coming in at around 7.06 square kilometers. But where Xenoblade Chronicles 2 really makes up for this is if we look at the whole map with the Cloud Sea, since that easily pumps the game up to a staggering 681.71 square kilometers. Anyways, if you liked the video, you should definitely check out the previous part where I measured Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Alright, bye!